little lunchbox looking thing is the Joyo Bantamp bass amplifier. It's a little 50-watt head that the boys over at Joyo sent to me to do a little review on. And as much as I would love to plug it into this 410 and see what it can do, I don't have time right now. I've got to get to Nevada for a couple of gigs, so I'm going to take this with me and see what other tricks it has up its sleeve. Let's go! You guys remember the last time that I was recording from a hotel room and I had like 30 outlets to choose from? This place has one. Kind of annoying, we're making it work. So one of the functions of this little bass amp is as a silent practice device. And the thing that really lends itself to that is the built-in Bluetooth functionality. It has this little antenna on the back, and then you just turn the Bluetooth on via the switch in the front, the LED turns blue, and then it's really easy to connect your phone or your laptop or your iPad or whatever. It just shows up as badass in the selection there. And then you can control the volume from your device. And it's really easy to, dial in just the right amount of output between your bass and your music. From my experience, that all worked really, really well up until the point where I was switching back and forth between devices. It didn't like to let go of my laptop in particular, which I think is more of a quirk of Bluetooth and not a quirk of the amp itself. But as a practice tool, this seems to work really, really great. I did my gig last night, I slept, I woke up, and I pulled this out of my suitcase and then practiced a couple of the tunes that I needed some more work on from last night. Worked really great. The one thing that I don't like about it is that the form factor is not as portable as something like the Zoom B14, which I've used for this kind of similar purpose. This thing is more of like a box, and then it also has this pretty big power supply that you need. Whereas the Zoom is just like flat like a pancake, and you can, run it off of batteries or even just like an external like USB battery, which is what I've done. The bonus with this, though, is that the Bluetooth makes it so that you don't have that extra cable, which is kind of nice for a little bit cleaner setup, so that you just have your guitar cable and then your headphones coming out of it. If we continue to compare it to the Zoom pedal, the other disadvantage that this has is that it's really limited on effects. You only have the 3-band EQ, a compressor, and then technically you've got overdrive because you can push that tube circuit. And that does sound really good. By the way, if you were curious about how it sounds, everything that you've heard up until this point has come from this unit. I wanted to record some stuff while I was here, and I brought my audio interface and not the USB cable for it. So yeah, that kind of annoyed me. So rest assured, you will be hearing sound samples. They just won't have been recorded here like I had originally planned. And while we're talking about recording, let's talk about the one thing that I think that is holding this back. So on the back, you've got speaker outputs, the foot switch so you can turn the compressor on and off, which I don't know how useful that is, but that's there. The headphone output, and then you have send and return for an effects loop. But here's the thing. I don't know of any bass player that uses an effects loop. I never have. All of my effects just go into the front of the amp, just in a single linear chain, and every other bass player I've ever known also does that. So here's the one change that I would make to this amp that I think would make it a much, much better unit. Get rid of the effects loop, put an XLR port there. I want a DI out on this amp. It's just a better system for bass players, and I really, really wish they would have thought of that. Alright, so I've been playing around with this thing for a couple more weeks, and I have some thoughts. And let me first state the obvious, 50 watts, it's just not enough. At least not for the work I'm doing anyway. 50 watts might be enough for doing like smaller acoustic gigs, but the lack of a DI on here just makes that whole situation worse. Like, I've never been to a venue that's really set up to mic a bass cabinet. And side note, you may have noticed that I didn't provide any sound clips of me recording through my bass cabinet, mostly because I don't have a mic that'll record bass really well. Also, I live in an apartment. I can't get too loud in here without making enemies. Rest assured though, it sounds more or less exactly the same out of a cabinet as it does out of the effects loop where I recorded it. And while we're talking about sound, Joyo says that they modeled this amp after Ampeg, but I don't really hear that in it at all. Like, it sounds good, it just doesn't sound like Ampeg. Like, it doesn't really have a specific character at all, really. So going back to cabinets for a second, that brings me to my second issue, which is that you only get the full wattage out of this when you can run a 4 ohm cabinet, and the vast majority of bass cabinets are 8 ohm, including the one that I have. And that means that you're only getting 25 watts through most bass cabinets, which is definitely not enough to play gigs with. And maybe you could get away with it if you turn the gain and the volume both all the way up, but then you have no clean headroom, and you just don't want to deal with that. All of this is to say that this is a good little amp, but it's just a little bit too full of compromises. Like, on one hand, it's a good headphone amp, but it's a little bit bulky. And on the other hand, it works as a head amp for your cabinet, but it's just not quite powerful enough. And going a little bit further in either of those directions would compromise the other side of it. Like, giving it more wattage would make it bigger, but making it more portable would give you less wattage. You know, like, it's just kind of in a weird, awkward in-between spot. This is the first bass offering in Joyo's line of Bantamp guitar amps, and in that sense, it kind of makes sense why some of the features are the way they are. It doesn't feel as much like a bass amp as it is a repurposed or revoiced guitar amp. You got things like, you know, the lack of a DI and the inclusion of the effects loop, the low wattage, the cab requirements, the foot switchable compressor, which I'm still kind of scratching my head about. Like, I would never use that. It's just so weird to me. But yeah, all of those things are very typical for guitar amps, but they just really don't make sense for bass. So while I can't really recommend this for most bass players, I think if you're the sort of person that's doing lower volume acoustic gigs without a PA, and you want a quiet unit for recording at home or on the road, then this is actually might be the perfect thing for you. I didn't think I would like the Bluetooth as much as I did, and I really hope that feature makes its way into other amps. Now, if you did want a recommendation for an amp that will do literally any gig and never want for volume, watch this video. This is the amp that you want.